My late aunt left me a house, which I recently acquired at the age of 24. My aunt was odd but rich, and she never hesitated to get what she wanted. One of her indulgences was her 2-story home. She bought a big house with a pool in the front yard, even though she had never been married. It appears that she didn't really need it. A few months ago, my aunt, who was 65 years old, passed suddenly. Her favorite people received a large portion of the estate she left behind. Fortunately, I was one of them. This $750,000 mansion was given to me, and the remainder of the estate was split up among a number of family members. I've spent the last 2 weeks living in this place since then. I haven't done unpacking yet, but I've come to like this apartment. When my parents found that I had relocated here, they stated they would come view my new house. My mother arrived with her 16-year-old stepdaughter the day after I relocated. I was a little uneasy. I didn't mind it much because I didn't despise my stepsister, but I had assumed it would just be my mother arriving. I didn't like her since she was reticent with me. I was nice to her, though, and she appeared especially close to my parents, not to me. For the past 2 decades, my parents have been apart. When I was 4 years old, they split up. My parents remained friendly and worked together to raise me even after the divorce. As I became older, I understood that they had just drifted apart in terms of principles and personality, rather than going through a grueling divorce. Conversely, they remained friends who trusted one another. As a result, I was raised with positive relationships with both parents. However, once my mother remarried a few years ago, our gap inevitably increased. I had courted him a few times, acting courteously each time, and she had been with her present spouse for 2 years. As a result, I didn't anticipate her being somewhat distant after marriage, although I wasn't really bothered by it. Now that I was an adult and self-sufficient, it was only right for Mom to spend time with her new family. I have spent more time with my father in recent years since he has stayed unmarried. I could now say that I have a deeper relationship with him than I do with my mother. Nevertheless, I had wanted to spend time with both parents to celebrate this new phase of my life. But my mother's manner was a little distant, like if she were someone else entirely. In addition, she and my stepsister both gave off the impression that we had just met, which made me uneasy. There was nothing I could do, and she no longer appeared comfortable. I was forced to accept it since I didn't want to make things more difficult. I've only seen my mother a few times a year, often on holidays, during the last few years. She had been easygoing and fun back then, but today was something else again. I couldn't help but believe that my stepsister's presence was the reason. I was still not sure, so I didn't tell my mother. However, my father expressed his admiration for the house, stating, "It's just right for you and your mother." I was thrilled to see that they were delighted with the house. So much so that this year I proposed having Christmas at my house. The notion pleased my father, but my mother and stepsister scowled and said nothing. I knew then that something was wrong with my mom. I should have known, looking back, that something was going to go wrong. I was told by my employer to travel to a suburban conference around a week ago. I was concerned because the site was 7 hours distant by car, but my supervisor persisted, saying, "I can't entrust this client to anyone but you." I thus at last consented. I was also given the opportunity to take a quick free vacation by being invited to stay the weekend at the hotel where the conference was being hosted. But the fact that a crucial item was due on the day of departure was one of the reasons I hesitated. There was a chance that the unique collector's edition game would be returned if no one was home to accept it. I could not miss the arrival because I had been anticipating this box. I could have to wait a long time again if it were returned. I really wanted this to arrive on time because I'm giving it to my partner as a gift for our 3rd anniversary in 2 weeks. Asking my father to come to the house and accept the box on my behalf was my initial idea, but he was leaving town for 6 days to go on a trip with some buddies. I couldn't approach my partner for assistance because the present was a surprise for him. I was on the verge of giving up after attempting to ask a few others as well, but none were accessible. I thought about asking my neighbors to accept the delivery, but to be honest, the most of them are chilly, hostile middle-aged office professionals. Even bringing up the topic seemed a little weird because I don't get along with them. I once questioned my father about why they were so unfriendly to me. Perhaps they believed me to be too young, he said. Still, I had nothing else to do at the moment. It seems that I would have to get over my discomfort and seek assistance from a neighbor. I could have asked my mother, but I threw that notion out of my head right once since I knew she would find a way to say no. Since our previous encounter, I haven't felt like asking her for anything since. To be honest, I was annoyed by her attitude. I was reluctant to ask my mother since I didn't want to disturb her. My mother was the one who initially got in touch with me, which surprised me. Before she remarried, we used to talk on the phone a lot, but she hadn't contacted me since, unless there was a particular reason. I thus paid close attention to what she had to say. My mother began by requesting permission to spend one day of the weekend at my residence. She stated that her residence was unavailable on the day she intended to host her book club meeting. She requested to borrow my house keys and offered to cover all of the costs for the day. She couldn't use their home because she had to host the conference, and her husband was expected home that day. I said yes right away. I didn't think my mother's request was strange because she has been a member of this book club for years, and my house is a little distance from her home. I was glad to go on my business trip, letting my mother stay at my place for the weekend, relieved that I was no longer concerned about the parcel. The timing was ideal because I was already going to be away from home at that time. We were both satisfied, and before I left, I gave my mother the keys. 2 days ago, at roughly 10 p.m. There was no reason to depart early because the customer was a bit of a peculiar character, and they had a meeting the next morning at 9 a.m. Despite the 7-hour travel, I was ready to unwind during the weekend. I was on my way to the hotel with the intention of using the spa the next day, but my employer called after we had been driving for almost 5 hours. The meeting was canceled because the customer apparently experienced a serious adverse response to something they ate a few hours prior and was admitted to the hospital. Sincerely, I was annoyed by the news, but at that point, there was nothing I could do. I thus made the decision to dine at a neighboring restaurant while I thought about what to do next. Then, since the customer rescheduled for the next weekend and the hotel would no longer be covered by the firm, I was told to go home without spending the night. I decided to check on my house while I was eating since I suddenly recalled it. Additionally, it was an excellent chance to test the new CCTV cameras that I had just put in. I opened the app to see if the cameras in each room could be viewed remotely. Unexpectedly, the image did not show middle-aged book club ladies conversing about books in the living room. Rather, a throng of youngsters occupied my home. Teenagers were everywhere throughout the home, not just in the main room. There were undoubtedly at least 20 children living in the house, but I hadn't precisely counted. I couldn't comprehend what was occurring. Therefore, I was horrified. I made the hasty decision to go home and see what was going on. When I discovered that a party was being hosted in my home without my consent, I believe it was about 4 p.m. I had no doubt that my stepsister and mother were complicit. Just before 11 p.m., I got home. A block away, loud music could be heard. I understood my stepsister was hosting a large party at my house as soon as I got there and noticed children relaxing in the yard while sipping beer. At the scene, I was indignant and unable to speak. A powerful jolt ran through my body as I opened the door. I couldn't believe no one had called the cops yet, and the music was blaring. The stench of perspiration and cheap beer permeated the home, and I had to make my way past kids who were either dancing, flirting, or simply smoking. The children gave me a weird look as I looked through every room in an attempt to locate my stepsister. I eventually located my stepsister in a second-floor bedroom that was silent. She was sipping beer and chatting with her companions while they sat on the floor. It was then that I saw her feet on my bed's pillow. That image gave me a rush of rage. She saw me standing in the doorway, but she said nothing, ignoring me and carrying on with her conversation. I phoned the cops right away, because I could not stand this kind of conduct. Then I took hold of her arm, forced her to get up, and ordered her to go right away. I was able to get her out of the room without holding her for very long, because she was not too inebriated to stand on her own. She aggressively approached me, though, and said that I had no right to eject her or stop her from utilizing the space because my mother had given her permission to do so today. Luckily, I have the paperwork to establish that this house is mine, not my mother's. I told her I had made a police call. When her companions heard this, they became afraid that the cops may arrive. After a few minutes, they all departed the scene after realizing that they were all intoxicated and that the majority of them were minors, which may cause major problems. When everyone had gone, I called my mother, who was the main source of this situation, and screamed at her for breaking my confidence. I informed her that I had to eject the teens who were at my house because her daughter had hosted a big party while I was away. Without consulting anybody first, she had created a disturbance in my home. My mother is solely to blame for it. I informed my mother that we were lucky no one had called the police and that her behavior was inappropriate. But rather of offering an apology, she became irate. My stepsister's birthday party was ruined by my overreaction, according to my mother. Although her house was too tiny to accommodate such a huge gathering, she had always wanted to hold a party for her friends. She believed that if she did it for my stepsister's sake, just this once, I would forgive her. Accusing me of selfishness, my mother said that since I now had a large home, it wouldn't harm to lend it to someone in need. She asserted that her daughter was just considering the property as a venue for a party. She maintained there was nothing wrong with her daughter. But that was a total miscommunication. They had utterly destroyed the home, played loud music, and consumed alcohol. I also found that the house had been broken into and valuables had been stolen. My sister, who had trespassed, was detained even though she was related. My mother still didn't seem to understand the gravity of what she and her daughter had truly done, even after I told her that they had escaped with a very modest penalty. She presumably threw the party to dazzle her friends, but she had lied to me, claiming the home was solely for a book club meeting. That was all she had done with her kid. Since it wasn't her home, she ought to have gotten permission before doing so. According to my mother, I would have refused if she had spoken to me first. It appears that my mother came to this conclusion based on my prior trips and the years prior for them. Of course, that isn't the case. My stepsister, not myself, had been the one who had been chilly and strange to me on a regular basis. I made an effort to be kind to my stepsister, but it was always reciprocated. After disputing with my mother, I finally stopped the conversation by saying that I didn't want to waste time trying to appease a haughty youngster. My stepdaughter and her pals had completely trashed up my house, and I couldn't clean it up on my own, so she was supposed to plan and pay for the cleaning. It was a big home, and I was too tired to clean it alone. She objected, claiming that because it was my home, I should clean up my own space if I expelled her stepdaughter and made her seem bad in front of her schoolmates. My mother stood up for her daughter without saying sorry or accepting payment. She hung up and blocked me from everything before I could respond. Even though it was already late, I was so furious that I called her husband right once and told him about it, demanding that he pay her right away for the mayhem his daughter had created. Luckily, her husband remained composed and promptly sent the money. Although he paid, He didn't appear to be very happy. He stated he would speak with my mother and his daughter and force them to apologize to me after expressing his instant regret for what they had done. Just as I was going to clarify that it wasn't required, the call was cut off. My mother called me early the next morning in a very irate mood. Her daughter reprimanded them for their behavior, and it seems that her husband had spoken to her after we spoke. My mother was thus upset that I had included him without telling her. In addition to telling my mother that they both needed to apologize to me, he had grounded his daughter. Instead of offering an apology, though, my mother screamed at me, claiming that her stepdaughter was correct and denouncing me as conceited and self-centered. I was surprised that she said such things to me, especially since all I had done was defend my moral convictions. Maybe calling her husband personally was too much, but other than that, nothing I asked or said to my mother was out of the question. Her comments, however, were utterly ridiculous. I haven't been able to discuss this matter with anyone for the past 2 days. The fact that my mother would say such terrible things about me still shocks me. She didn't need to purposefully harm me if our relationship had deteriorated over time. I'm still troubled by this truth. I'm not exactly sure where things went wrong. I always made an effort to remain composed. I wouldn't have needed to call her spouse in the first place if my mother hadn't blocked me. I thus feel fully right in reaching out to my mother's spouse to clarify the circumstances behind her and his daughter's behavior. I couldn't keep quiet about the mayhem they wreaked at the party in my house. It had been a week since the event. I sincerely appreciate all of the comments I've gotten. I appreciate all of the comments left on my first post. Your opinions have been helpful. I don't communicate with my mother at the moment. I made the decision to stop talking to her after that happened. I had previously believed that my mother's distancing from my father and me was due to her husband's influence, but it turns out that my stepsister was the reason. I don't know why, but it feels like she doesn't like me. I've always made an effort to be friendly to my stepsister despite her constant selfishness and self-centeredness, but that's gone now. I must accept the fact that this is the course my mother has taken. Does my mother's preference for her stepdaughter over me make me sad? To be honest, it is. But I don't plan on letting it bother me anymore. My relationship with my mother has always been a source of concern for me, but recent events have made my stance clear and given me the opportunity to make new choices. Although it was shocking to learn that my mother put her stepdaughter above our relationship, I've had time to gradually come to terms with the reasons thanks to discussions with my father and encouragement from my partner. My father claims that because my stepsister makes her think of her younger self, my mother has a particular bond with her. It's also possible that my mother projects her ideal mother image into my stepsister because her mother went away. This might be the reason my mother prefers the stepsister, who makes her think of her former self, over the real daughter, who is geeky like me. Even though I had conflicting emotions about this interpretation, coming to terms with it helped me decide to sever my relationship with my mother. My father, who has also decided to stop communicating with her, completely supports my choice. I've been able to take a fresh look at my own family's structure and move ahead thanks to this help. My 3-year boyfriend proposed to me at this period. Our anniversary celebration with close friends and family became a pivotal event in our lives. I will never forget his planned surprise party, and I knew we would be together as soon as I got the engagement ring. I'm excited about this fresh start, even if I was a little uneasy about my mother's absence. However, I am sure that I can create a bright future with his presence and the help of friends. My mother and I have entirely parted ways since agreeing to cut off our relationship. My mother often shares pictures of their everyday activities and excursions on social media, giving the impression that she and my stepsister are happy together. My father occasionally tells me about her, but we don't communicate directly. Although my mother's and my stepsister's lives appear to be going well on the surface, I've heard that they're actually pretty turbulent. It appeared to be a lively and loving mother-daughter connection when I watched how close my mother and stepsister appeared to be on social media. However, my father's account of the actual circumstances told a completely different tale. My mother has been spending her days resolving my stepsister's regular mischief at school and in her personal life as she approaches adolescence. Among the numerous difficulties my stepsister encounters are friendship concerns, bullying at school, and declining grades. My mother is frequently summoned to the school. Her rebellious attitude has also grown more noticeable, which has resulted in regular confrontations over unimportant issues with her mother. My father says my mother is upset that the daughter she thought would be a reflection of her younger self has become a problematic child and is unsure of how to handle the situation. My mother has made a concerted effort to be the perfect mother, but she is suffering because of the disconnect between her expectations and reality. In addition, my mother's relationship with her spouse is being strained due to my stepsister's bad conduct. He believes that the amount of time and energy my mother devotes to his daughter negatively affects the entire family and causes disputes all the time. My stepsister's presence has caused their once harmonious relationship to steadily erode, which was unforeseen by my father, who said that the more she choices, the more she appears to limit her own universe. My mother tries valiantly to shield her daughter from her husband's harsh treatment, which frequently results in disagreements between them. I've been informed that there are still a lot of tensions in their household. As a result, my mother no longer smiles as much and becomes sick sometimes from worry. Nevertheless, she keeps putting my stepsister first, which aggravates her husband, and it's unclear what will happen to their family in the end. I get a peculiar spectrum of feelings whenever I hear of my mother's difficulties. I used to feel sad and angry about my mother's alienation and her preference for my stepsister over me. But now when I hear about the struggles she's had as a result of her decisions, I feel both pity and loneliness. However, I am aware that I have no authority to meddle in my mother's family affairs and that I should put my own happy future first. My mother's struggles stem from her desire to create the perfect mother-daughter bond colliding with the realities of life. But now there is nothing I can do. It is up to my mother to acknowledge and deal with the fallout from her previous decisions and deeds. This is her journey, and this is the realization I've come to as a result of my development.